Good, I have the full list. Now writing the story with completely new names not on this list. My name is Callie. I'm 32 years old and I work as an electrician. I know. I can already hear it. An electrician? People say that with a little pause right after, like they're waiting for me to correct myself. Like I must have meant something else. Something more acceptable. Something that sounds better at dinner parties. But that's exactly what I am. I've been doing this work for 9 years. I pull wire, I read blueprints, I troubleshoot panels that haven't been touched since the Carter administration. I show up before sunrise in a hard hat and steel-toed boots, and I go home with grease on my hands and a satisfaction in my chest that I honestly never expected when I started. I didn't plan any of this, by the way. After my dad passed, money got tight fast, and a 2-year trade program was something I could actually afford. My half-sister, my father's daughter from his first marriage, went to a private university in Connecticut. She studied marketing. She married well. And every family gathering since then has felt like a quiet competition she doesn't realize I've already opted out of. Her name is Vanessa. And last spring, she invited me to her husband's company anniversary dinner. I should have said no. I knew from the moment I got the invitation, a heavy cream envelope with gold embossing, no less, that I was being invited as set dressing. Vanessa does that. She collects people the way some women collect handbags. You're useful until you're not, and then you get moved to a shelf. But she's still my sister. Half-sister. Whatever. We share a father, and that means something to me even when it doesn't seem to mean much to her. So I ironed my nicest blouse, I put on the one pair of heels I own, and I drove 40 minutes to a restaurant I'd never heard of in a part of the city where the valets outnumber the parking spots. The dinner was for her husband's architecture firm. 10 years in business. They'd rented out a private room in the back of the restaurant. Floor-to-ceiling windows, long tables set with real linen, the kind of candles that don't drip. Her husband, whose name is Brandt, was at the center of it all, moving from group to group, laughing easily, shaking hands. He always struck me as a decent man, quieter than Vanessa, more thoughtful. His business partner was there too, a man named Grayson, around 60. With that particular kind of stillness you see in people who've spent a lot of years being the most competent person in any room. He sat near the head of the table with his wife beside him, and he barely spoke during the cocktail hour. Just listened and watched with the focused attention of someone who never wastes energy. I didn't know who he was at first. I just noticed him because he was the only person in the room who didn't seem to be performing. I found a seat near the far end of the table, next to a couple who worked in commercial real estate and had absolutely no interest in talking to me once they found out I wasn't also in commercial real estate. I drank my water and watched the room fill up. Vanessa swept in about 20 minutes into the cocktail hour, and the energy in the room shifted the way it always does when she arrives somewhere. She has that quality. She walks in and suddenly everyone is a little more aware of how they're standing. She spotted me, gave me a wave that was more of a display than a greeting, and went back to working the room. The dinner started. Courses came out. The conversation around me was mostly about projects and clients and a development going up on the east side of the city. I smiled when people looked at me and said very little. Then, about midway through the main course, Vanessa stood up. She tapped her glass. Actually tapped it, with a tiny silver spoon she'd apparently brought for exactly this purpose, and smiled at the room. "I just want to take a moment," she said, "to introduce some of the family who came out to celebrate tonight." She went around the table. Her mother-in-law got a warm, effusive introduction. 2 of Brandt's colleagues got mentioned by name and accomplishment. A cousin of hers who'd recently gotten into medical school got a round of applause. Then she got to me. She gestured in my direction with her wine glass, the way you might point out a piece of furniture. "And that's my half-sister, Callie," she said. Then she laughed. Not a mean laugh, not exactly, but the kind of laugh that lets everyone know a joke is coming. She fixes wiring for a living. You know, electrician work. It's very hands-on. A few people chuckled. Someone at the far end of the table said, "Oh, how practical," in a tone that was not a compliment. Vanessa smiled and moved on, already reaching for her glass. I didn't say anything. I've had a lifetime of practice not saying anything when Vanessa does things like this. I just kept my face neutral and took a sip of water and let the moment pass. Or I thought I did. Because then I noticed Grayson looking at me. Not the polite glance and look away that most people do. He was actually studying my face. The way you look at someone when you're trying to place them, when you're sure you've seen them before but can't remember where. He had his fork resting on his plate and he'd gone very still. And his wife noticed and touched his arm lightly, and he didn't respond. I looked away. I figured it would pass. Sometimes people think they recognize you, and then they realize they don't and everyone moves on. But when I glanced back a few minutes later, he was still looking. Brant caught it too. He leaned slightly toward his partner and said something quietly. Grayson shook his head once, like he was clearing it, and picked his fork back up. But he didn't really eat. He was somewhere else. The table conversation shifted to something about a project in Denver. Vanessa was talking about their upcoming trip to Portugal. The waiter appeared and refreshed glasses. And then, from down the table, I heard Grayson's voice, quiet, careful, directed at no one in particular, but somehow I knew it was meant for me. I'm sorry, he said. What was your name again? Everyone near us paused slightly. I looked at him. Callie, I said. He nodded slowly. Callie. He said it the way people repeat a word when they're checking it against something in their memory. What part of the city do you work in? Vanessa laughed from further down the table. Grayson, don't encourage her to talk about electrical work at dinner. A few people smiled. I kept my eyes on Grayson. North side, mostly, I said. Commercial and industrial. Some older residential buildings. He nodded again. His expression hadn't changed. Still calm, still searching. His wife was watching him now with a look I recognized as quiet concern. You work with a crew or independently? He asked. Both, I said. I run a 2-person crew for most jobs. Sometimes I pull in extra hands. Something shifted in his face. It was subtle, just a slight change around his eyes, like a piece of something had clicked into place, but he wasn't quite ready to say it yet. Vanessa cut in again, louder this time. Grayson, I promise she doesn't want to talk about this. She gave me a smile that was meant to look kind. You deserve a night off from all that, right, Callie? I didn't answer. Grayson didn't answer either. He was still thinking. The dinner continued. More courses came. A toast was made. People laughed at a story Brant told about a site visit that went sideways in a particularly spectacular way. The room got warmer with wine and conversation, and for a while the strange moment at my end of the table faded into the background. But I kept noticing Grayson glancing in my direction. Once, when I looked up, he caught my eye and gave me a small nod. The kind that says, I haven't forgotten. I'm still working on it. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just nodded back. It wasn't until the dessert course that he spoke again. The room had gotten a little louder. A few people had moved their chairs around to talk across the table. Brant and Vanessa were deep in conversation with a couple near the center, and Grayson's wife had stepped away for a moment. He leaned slightly forward and looked at me directly. Did you work on the Aldermore building? He asked. On Clement Street. About 2 years ago, my stomach did something strange. Yes, I said slowly, that was one of ours. He exhaled, long and quiet, like he'd been holding something. I knew it, he said, almost to himself. Brant turned at the sound of his partner's voice. Knew what? Grayson looked at his partner, then around the table. Some of the nearby conversations had trailed off. People were listening without quite admitting they were listening. 2 years ago, he said, I was working late in the Aldermore building. It was a Wednesday night in November. Most of the building had cleared out. I was on the 4th floor. The table had gone quiet. There was a fire, he continued. Electrical fire. Started in the maintenance corridor, behind the east stairwell. It moved fast. The sprinkler system on that floor had a fault. I didn't know that. He paused. He wasn't performing. He was just remembering. I got disoriented in the smoke. I couldn't find the exit. I was on the floor trying to stay low, and the corridor was completely black, and I genuinely knew, that I was not going to find my way out. No one at the table moved. And then, someone grabbed my arm. He looked at me. A woman in work gear. Hard hat, tool belt. She'd been in the building finishing up a repair on the panel in the maintenance corridor. The same area where the fire started. She hadn't left yet. She heard me. His voice was steady, but only barely. She pulled me out. She knew the layout of that floor because she'd spent 2 days working on it. She got me to the stairwell door and stayed with me all the way down to the street. The paramedics said another few minutes and I would have had severe smoke inhalation. They weren't sure I would have made it out. He looked at me again. Not with doubt. With certainty. That was you. The table was absolutely silent. I felt heat rise in my face. I didn't know what to say. I remembered that night. Of course I remembered it. I'd been finishing up a panel repair that had taken longer than expected, and I smelled the smoke before I saw it. And then I heard someone coughing in the corridor, and I didn't think. I just went. I was just finishing a job, I said. I heard you and went toward the sound. You knew the exits, he said. You knew exactly where the stairs were in the dark. You didn't panic. You kept me calm the whole way down. He turned to Brant. I never got her name. The paramedics took over at the street and she disappeared before I could ask. I've thought about it every year since. Brant was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. His wife, Vanessa, had gone very still. Grayson looked back at me one more time. You introduced her as someone who fixes wiring, he said. To no one in particular. To everyone. His voice was quiet. No anger in it. Just clarity. She does. And 2 years ago, that wiring, and the fact that she stayed to finish the job right, is the reason I walked out of that building. The silence lasted a long moment. Then Brant stood up from his chair and walked around the table toward me. He extended his hand. I had no idea, he said. I'm sorry. I genuinely had no idea. You don't need to apologize, I said. It's not, I want to, he said. On behalf of this table, and on behalf of my partner, who is clearly here tonight because of you. Grayson's wife had come back to her seat at some point during all of this. She was looking at me with a particular expression of someone who has been afraid of something for a long time and is only now allowing themselves to release it. Thank you, she said, and her voice broke slightly on the second word. I didn't know what to do. I'm not good at being thanked. I'm good at work. I'm good at solving the problem in front of me. Being the center of a room full of people staring at me with wet eyes is not something I have training for. I heard him, I said. I just went toward the sound. You didn't have to, Grayson said. That building was burning. You could have run straight to the exit. I didn't have an answer for that because honestly, running the other direction had never occurred to me. That's not a virtue. It's just how I'm wired, and I've never known if that makes me brave or just bad at self-preservation. Slowly, the table found its way back to itself. People started talking again, quieter now, and a few of them looked at me differently. Not dramatically, not performatively, just with the recalibrated attention of people who've been reminded that they don't always know what they're looking at. An older woman across from me, who had laughed the loudest at Vanessa's joke earlier, reached over and touched my hand briefly. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Vanessa didn't say anything for the rest of the dinner. She sat at her place near the center of the table, and when people spoke to her she answered, and she smiled when smiling was called for. But the confidence that usually radiates off her like heat, the specific kind of confidence that comes from believing you're the most impressive person in any room, that was gone. And in its place was something quieter and harder to name. She didn't look at me, not once, for the rest of the evening. As the dinner wound down and people started saying their goodbyes, Grayson stopped me near the door. Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. Why did you never reach out? You knew the name of the building. It was in the news. You could have. I thought about it for a second. I didn't think I needed to, I said. You made it out. That was the point. He looked at me for a moment like he was deciding something. I'd like to hire your crew for the renovation we're starting next spring, he said. The Clement Street building. Full rewire of 2 floors. I want someone I trust. I said I'd send him a quote. And then I got my coat, said a quiet goodbye to Brant, and walked out to my car in the parking lot. It was a cold night. Clear. I sat in the driver's seat for a minute before starting the engine, and I thought about what my dad used to say when I was little. That the work you do with your hands is the most honest work there is, because you can look at it when you're done and know exactly what you made. He was a carpenter. He smelled like sawdust. He never made much money. He was the most capable person I've ever known. I think about him every time someone says, "Oh, you're just an electrician," with that pause in the middle. I don't argue. I never argue. The work speaks for itself. It always has. I've thought about that night a lot since it happened. Not the part where the room went quiet, not the part where Grayson said my name like he was finally setting something down that he'd been carrying for 2 years. I've thought about the part before all of that. The moment when Vanessa gestured at me with her wine glass and laughed, and a few people at the table laughed with her. And I just sat there and let it happen. I wasn't angry. That's the part that still surprises me when I think about it. I've had years to get angry about the way Vanessa sees me, and somewhere along the way, I just stopped. Not because I gave up, and not because I decided she was right. I stopped because I realized that her opinion of my work had nothing to do with the work itself. Those are two completely separate things, and I've been treating them like they weren't. There's something that happens when you do skilled work with your hands every day. You develop a relationship with reality that's very hard to argue with. Either the panel is wired correctly or it isn't. Either the circuit holds or it trips. Either you found the fault or you didn't. There's no impression management in a junction box. No one cares how you present yourself in a meeting when a building is burning and someone is on the floor in the dark. That's what I keep coming back to. Not as a comfort, but as a fact. I was in that building because I'd stayed late to finish a repair the right way instead of the fast way. I knew the layout of that floor because I'd spent 2 full days on it, learning it the way you learn any space you're responsible for. Carefully, with attention, without shortcuts. When I heard Grayson coughing in that corridor, I didn't think about credit or recognition or what it might mean later. I just went toward the sound, because that's what the situation required, and I was the person there to do it. Vanessa has always measured value in visibility. The right job title, the right address, the right dinner party introduction. I understand that. I grew up watching her build a life out of surfaces, and I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because I think it's genuinely lonely. That kind of accounting. When the only things that count are the things other people can immediately see, you spend a lot of energy managing the view. You never get to just be somewhere and do the thing in front of you. I don't have that problem. My work doesn't photograph well, and it doesn't make for impressive dinner conversation, and it leaves marks on my hands that don't come out completely, no matter how long I scrub. And I have never once, in 9 years, finished a job and wondered if it mattered. I know it mattered because I can see exactly what I did, and I know what would have happened if I hadn't done it. That's what my dad meant, I think, when he talked about honest work. He wasn't talking about virtue. He was talking about clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from being accountable to the thing itself, not to how it looks, not to what someone at a dinner table thinks of it, but to whether it actually holds. Grayson is alive because the work held. That's the whole story. Everything else that happened that night, the silence, the looks, Vanessa's expression, was just the moment when the gap between appearance and reality got too wide to ignore. I sent Grayson the quote the following week. We start in March.